are back today on Play It Forward. We're here today with Jasmine Je'toi, filmmaker, writer, director. The film is Imprint, a very smartly done film that tackles race, the big subject of race in America, which is still, prevalent. It's a young country. It's not that been that long. Jasmine, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. My pleasure.
I'm Jasmine Je'toi. I am so sorry that I put that on D&D. Anywho.
Oh, I didn't even hear it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been a writer director for a little over half a decade now. I have my own production company called Assistance Production. And yeah, pretty much my work is about human commonality, the emotional commonality of like the human experience. And sometimes people can be a bit, you know, coy or even choose to be ignorant about certain topics or just experiences. And I think that emotional connection is what is always understood. So a lot of my projects kind of always had that line of thread. So yeah, but I'm also a poet and I've been doing that longer than anything.
Yeah.
So writing is fun. But yeah, Imprint is about the fragility of innocence, honestly. Um,
Mm.
and about how a father has to basically explain race to his young daughter. And I think that I'll leave it there
Yeah.
because I'm sure you'll probably ask me a question
We'll
about
we'll
that.
keep it going. We'll keep it going. I mean, I have to confess that it hits home very much here to my heart because I have a little girl and she is comparable age as one of the leading characters that you have there. And so, whatever the issues are of the world that are threatening to our children, um, to be able to confront those issues in a way that is healthy and positive for the child and is can be a challenge, it can be really a challenge and it's tough to have to um, tell your children about those things, but they're okay, they're resilient, they get it, they know the playground, they know that different kids act different way and they can sort of extrapolate based on that. So it
Right.
does come out well, but it is necessary, to talk about. And so that's part of what we're doing here today is having the conversation. I love the fact that, you like to deal with universal subjects and how we are all united and by that common human experience that is far more um, unifying than divisive. And that is the topic of this film. In terms of the storyline, I'll just set it up a little bit for the audience. It's really a great approach, how you approach the film from the
Mm.
deaf male black perspective. um, that really made it very accessible and unique. And it was a great kind of segue into that broader topic. Um, and and so that was a really nice kind of narrative writer touch that you did there. But anyway, so there's a deaf male black character and his daughter. We're not really sure what happened to mom, but mom's out of the picture. Seemingly it wasn't a divorce, it was something happened, and both characters are still very much, connected with mother. But she's out of the picture. Dad's got to step up and he's got to play both roles. And there is some hinting of the external world. There's that news headline that kind of came up unexpectedly and it came and went. And then that set up the major climax conflict where the male character gets stopped by a police officer. He can't hear him. And so the police officer is jumping to all sorts of conclusions. He's, frightened. The daughter comes out of the car and the police officer mistakenly thinks he's resisting him when he's trying to communicate to him, hey, I'm deaf, I might, so forth. So a great setup of the conflict. And, you know, it's interesting because as my job when I review these films, I got to look at the narrative, I look at the theme, I look at the storyline and what themes are going on at play. And it's really easy to say, okay, well, there's an issue of prejudice and, race, but it's deeper than that. And like you said, it's more universal, and it's more universal in terms of that loss of innocence and
Yeah.
what the child is witnessing. And for me, that's what's going on for the child. For the father, I think what's deeper than race is that the father has to step up to a place where he can't be reactive. He's got to overcome those reactionary feelings, whether it's to those aggressive reactionary feelings, and then to teach his daughter unity and harmony so she can live in that world and then not grow up to be combative and reactive and see
Right.
that divisive issue as divisive, but how to unify. And that is, a higher elevation of our consciousness that we have to rise to. And he's doing it, whether it's for himself, but for his child, certainly.
Right.
Where, aside from the headlines, clearly you're of African American descent, aside from the headlines and how it hits you personally and being in America, and seeing it all around you, what was that like a little germinal idea of thought that says, hey, I want to write a story about this in this way, and and I'm really that passion. What was that first seed of passion for you?
Honestly, I feel like, during this time, it was everything around me kind of like affecting me. And a fun fact is, Imprint actually was going to be a proof of concept for like this action film, and the daughter was going to take vengeance on her dad's death. Like I was
Oh
gonna
wow. Oh,
go,
you're going
yeah,
there. Yeah.
I was gonna go there,
Okay.
right? And I was like, let's reel it in and try to find some joy. Um, but in a different perspective, but also I didn't want it to kind of feel like, oh, just another one of those films, like that has been the tone about a much needed conversation, something that's still, a issue, but I didn't want it to feel so generic, but also wanted it to add to that conversation. Because at the time, like, Black men were getting killed, you know, with their children in the car, like quite literally. And it was just, I remember being so paralyzed by just the noise. Like I
Yeah.
remember just kind of being in, like, I'm talking about blackout curtains, like can't move out the bed. Like it was just so much
Wow. Oh my God.
because, yeah, because you just like,
Yeah.
I, I see my dad, I see my brother, or whatever, and all of these stories, and that fear can be crippling. Um, so yeah, that's kind of like where it started, and of course,
Wow.
like I said, it changed, and as I guess was a little, I won't say less angry, because there's a lot to be angry about, but definitely just trying to like hone the power of whatever voice I have in telling this story and what is important. And I think the point of importance is we go through so much in any context of like whatever the minority is or the underrepresented voice is, but you have to find a way to not let those things steal your joy.
Yeah.
And that is why I made the story kind of like come around to it being them in the end. And, you know, um, the conversation that he had with her about, unity and still being, proud of yourself and finding your joy at the end of it all. I think that is what we have to do, and that is the reality of it. And um that was kind of like where I wanted it to kind of morph into. So, it took some time and it was a journey, but yeah, that's kind of where it
That's
went.
beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful metaphor of your life and your own experience. And, you just can't help. All art is just this, as we were talking about a little before we started, is this kind of mirror to the artist's life and this, interaction. And that in what you did is you were able to sculpt your own outcome through sculpting your art. And
Mm,
so,
yeah,
you didn't allow it to steal your joy, and you knew your voice, and your voice is putting something out there, and you crafted your own voice, and in the process crafted your own, where you're putting your emphasis on, yes, exists, but yes, this is more important, and the sweetness of life I will still
right.
taste it with all the ingredients that it has to offer. And, that is just a wonderful message to put out there. And it's so inspiring. It's so, uplifting to anybody who's uh, watching any car accident happening, any this awful thing where people, innocent people, I mean, we're all innocent people, but, even the people that are want to have harmony, those people where they're going up against or they're in the face of just
Hmm.
pain and suffering on levels that are incomprehensible to us. I mean, it's happening all over the world in all different settings and colors. And so how do we not let that, when we watch that, even as bystanders safe in our own homes, as the case may be, or not, but if we are, as we watch that, how do we not say that? We all kind of boil down to this. Well, if there is a God, how could he let this happen? Or
Right.
she or her or whatever thing. So, and that's what can happen to people. And then you've got the blackout curtains, you're laying in bed, and because you're devastated. You're just like, I can't taste any of the sweetness because how can it be so bitter?
Right.
So
Literally.
how have you faced that as an artist through your work, through your own personal life, through seeing people that grew up with and I mean, just on such a visual cues, they're so like there, yeah, that looks like my dad. Oh my God, it could be me.
Hmm.
How have you gone through that process of healing?
I think honestly, it's like twofold. I've gotten to a point where, as I continue to kind of like grow and go, like life is not to be lived without pain. It's going to happen. Like it is a part of it, but also just like giving myself the space to feel it because that is where you are human. If you don't feel it anymore, you know, are you even alive? Like, like when you feel it, that's how you know you're alive. And so just like feeling it and letting myself go through it, but also just understanding that like you have a voice, you have a gift that needs to be heard and a perspective that needs to be, heard, and your gift is yours. Either you got it or you don't, but the action behind it, the discipline behind it is also your responsibility. Either you're going to do it or you're not. So
Yeah,
there's like this twofold of like, feel your
love
feelings,
that.
kind of like
Yeah,
reparenting yourself almost, feel
yeah,
your feelings
yeah,
and get it done.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
um, it's like that process and it's sometimes really hard,
Oh my God. Oh my God.
You're
Yeah.
just like
But
almost kicking and screaming to the laptop, like, I don't want to go there. And
that's
then you
courage.
go
That's
there.
courage. And then you do it. And that's, what is and again now the human, the triumph of the human spirit, it's in those things, it's in that courage, and taking, something painful and resurrecting it into something powerful. And that's what, I'm hearing you say when you're talking about um first is allowing it to be,
Hmm.
for allowing that thing to be is so powerful because if you don't, it you're cutting off circulation, you're cutting off a part of your life flow, you're just cutting it off and you're numbing yourself, and that's so it, it can be very debilitating, right,
Yeah.
to humans. And then, so as you allow it, you kind of, it's amazing. Your body can kind of expand. Like once you really allow that feeling, you can just kind of feel the painful growth in your soul and your psyche, and that is just like, and then you use its fuel, right? Then you go to that laptop and then
Right.
you are speaking, to your innermost center from it and listening, right?
Right.
Speaking and listening. And so, again, it's just that, burning, taking that ash and coal or wood or fuel or brokenness. And so, to get back onto the theme a little bit, I really like to ask the filmmaker, making films myself and seeing them like years later and kind of being removed from them and then watching it and being like, Interesting. Like after, there's that moment, something you see something. So like now where you're at in your life, you look back on the film and I don't know last time you watched it, but when you recall watching it last, what was your takeaway?
Like not thinking of it from like a technical
Ah,
standpoint.
but yes, yes. Forget any of the flaws, what you could have done better. Right. Yeah,
There's
I know
something.
that'll blind you.
Um, yeah, so from like a technical standpoint, I was like, okay, because I was so intentional
No,
or
not from a technical standpoint.
oh, not from a standpoint.
Not
Okay.
from a tech. No, I mean your
Okay.
takeaway. Forget the flaws. I'm talking about the takeaway
Oh,
from like,
okay.
yeah, the moral,
Okay.
the theme, the
So
what you really are like, okay, this story is about. And you shared a little bit of it, but
yeah. Um, my favorite part of that film, and I mean like after it was done, like kind of like watching it over and over again and then taking a good amount of time and not watching it. But the first time, anytime I saw it like in festivals and things like that, the the part of like the last scene of them like celebrating her mom's birthday, just like it just gets me. I mean,
yeah,
it's a tearjerker for me, and I
yeah,
really don't know why, but I
yeah.
absolutely love that scene. And then also, I think the music is probably some of my favorite. I love the upbeat innocence of like the beginning. It really, I think, draws you in, but also, um, just kind of like, um, I feel like showing a very small glimpse of the fact that like the officer and like his state of being and that hesitance even in his like perspective kind of adds a whole different layer of like conversation that I don't think that I think it can be overlooked for the greater picture, but I think it is something that shouldn't be overlooked. Um of like that moment of hesitation, right? That moment of like actually thinking before you react and all those things up until that point. So yeah, those are a few things that I kind of like that stand out to me that are like things that I enjoy. But for the overall theme, yeah, that I think it's the joy in it that really does it for me. Because I do understand that it is a hard topic, and I do think that even the broader topic of officers being fluent in ASL is important, right? Like
Yeah.
that's something that is not talked about or is not even required, which is insane to me. But so, it's the culture in which we live in and it could be better, you know. So yeah, those are some things that when I
Thank
look back,
you.
yeah.
I get like the part for sure about, the child in the end, and I think why it's such a tearjerker is because, the will, and that's something you mentioned earlier, the will to continue, the will to have joy, and the child's natural kind of that strength that children can show us when they accept what is and still persevere is very inspiring and because we know how fragile they are.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to see. You know, what do you think those of us who are all like, in our day-to-day worlds of whatever preoccupations we may have with trying to find our own path, and whatever challenges we're on facing, how can we make this topic of race and um, something that's not as touchy, something that's as, more natural where we can be more comfortable with discussing it?
Hmm. I think it's the acknowledgement that it exists and that it affects a lot of things. I think sometimes the fight is the fact that some people want to pretend that it doesn't exist or affect things when it in fact affects a lot of things. And unfortunately, we're still in the process of trying to dismantle it having so much power, but how can we do that if we're not even all on the same page of the fact that it exists,
Yeah.
and we can't erase history. It's uncomfortable, sure, but like whatever. Like, it's just like none of us at this point were physically responsible. But if we uphold, such harmful history as like, oh, it didn't exist and stuff like that context is important. And I think once we kind of get over that, we can really make some leeway.
Yeah.
Um, with a lot of things, and also just kind of like education and
Yeah.
even in certain forms of like even my blackness. I'm black, but I'm considered pretty. So it's like there's a privilege there. And I acknowledge my privilege
You mean in
there.
terms of skin tone?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
colorism is a part of racism and all those things,
Yeah.
right? And having a slimmer nose or not so
Yeah.
full lip, whatever.
Yeah.
I know that about my privilege. And so I think even in the conversation of like even like as a white male, knowing that privilege of that, or a black male, knowing the privilege there. It's like you're a
Yeah.
male,
Yeah.
all these intersectionalities. And I
Yeah.
think kind of having that ability to take ownership and just like um move responsible with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. And
Um
I think that's great. I mean, the country is changing slowly. It's continuing. There are people that have, the understanding and the intentions of wanting to make it, a real melting pot that it is, often talked about. And it's there in parts, and it's not finished by any means.
Right.
But I know, it is it that you mentioned. I mean, it's slavery,
Mm,
and, we had the Civil War over it, and it was the greatest casualty that, in terms of American deaths, it was America fighting
yeah,
America. And, you know, it's just interesting as you're talking, I'm reflecting on a couple of things that I've encountered, and that where I live, in Rhode Island and also in Massachusetts, there's some cool stuff going on. I happen to be in a town where W.E. Du Bois was, born, where he lived there for a while. And so there's a lot of, you go into places, parks, and, he's got a homestead there. And so there are areas where you go to that have plaques and talk about this is part of the Underground Railroad, and this was here, and this was there, and that was there. And it's, really important, and to have conversations like these where, some people may not even understand the nuances of, prejudice and racism within the Black community in terms of the skin tone and the nose and the this and the things that you mentioned. They'll like be like, really, that's going on? And
mm,
and the internal kind of, um, you know, um, it's almost like you're taking on the power ruling class, and, you're reperpetuating it, and that happens,
yeah,
and it's
it
really
has happened.
tough. It's really tough. And I think just to talk about it aloud and have people know about it, and on this format, whatever, we can do, is important. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And did you have a thought?
Oh, I was just thinking to myself, like, and I also think as a white male, and there are rooms that you're going to be in that I won't ever be in. And there are people that you could have this conversation with that I probably wouldn't be able to reach the way you would be able to reach them. So even having those conversations with other white males or in that community is important because that's amongst you guys, because it affects you guys just as much as it affects us. Just because I'm like black doesn't mean it affects me. I mean, it does affect me more, but it also affects you and your community. And having those conversations and being comfortable talking to them. And I don't know, what I'm saying? I'm just saying that just because it's a thought, not
For
saying that it,
sure. No, we all carry the
but I
torch,
do
but
think that,
we
yeah.
all carry the torch. But what I will say is I've never seen myself as a white male,
Mm,
and that's not something I identify with. And
mm,
there are several reasons for that. One is I came as an immigrant to the country as a young boy, and I was, um, from Semitic descent, Russian Jewish background. So I never identified with an Eastern European, Anglo-Saxon white male. That was not part of it. So, but it's interesting, naturally, I can see how you would think that that's
Yeah.
what I am. And so there's all those, that's really the subject that interests me is identity.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
ultimately, there is the identity, the superficial identity of three-dimensional is so limited. I mean,
Yeah.
that's forget
Yeah.
that. There is the soul and there is the bone, the blood, and all the way back. So that, how do you identify with that? And how do you walk through life with that being the commonality? And yet still, of course, because I talked to a filmmaker and I was like, yeah, I don't see color. I'm not seeing you. Like maybe I'll take it, oh, it's black and white, but I'm not looking at that. That's not like how I
Yeah.
identify you, you
Right.
know. I'm wanting to go on a different level. And that particular person was really offended by it,
Hmm.
because they were like, nah, come on, but it's not to say that I discount that or don't appreciate